So, by way of background, I'm going to start where every decent, God-fearing American should, with these two books by Jack Winterston, The History of Our Waterways and Waterfronts. The history hinges really on the city founders, that's, like George Washington, Pierre L'Enfant, their vision of the capital as a thriving port city lined by waterfronts that were centers of not just shipping, but commerce, trades, professions, housing, and recreation, the hubs of civic life. And they highlight the fraught history of the development and redevelopment of the waterfronts over the roughly 200 years since, which mostly served to take us further and further away from that vision. The willful destruction of the clearing of the land for plantations, willful displacement of people for freeways and urban renewal, the reservation of waterfront land for military and industrial use really gives way to that malignant neglect, backdoor utilization. It's no longer where you put the welcome mat. It's where you bury your refuse. And these redevelopments did nothing at all for the rivers themselves. Quite the contrary. But oddly enough, in that last respect, the east and west of the city had the same problem. Georgetown and the southwest waterfront, like the eastern branch, was serving purposes very much counter to that original vision. Now, when the history turns to the more contemporary waterfront redevelopments, the new Washington Harbor in Georgetown and the wharf in Southwest, the vision of our city founders and our slide away from it really served to highlight that things were finally getting right. Now, the Georgetown waterfront maybe has had its ups and downs in terms of strategic success, occupancy and utilization levels, public revenues generated, etc. But looking at the results, I see these four markers of holistic success that I've sort of abstracted from Jack's book, and I call those the four pillars. River positive, that means design and infrastructure improvements that are a net positive for water quality and river quality. Hubs of civic life, it's a bit overstated in this day and age. We're a big city now, we have lots of hubs. Suffice it to say, it's about bringing the community to the water's edge and vice versa, making them places for people. Being natural extensions of the existing neighborhoods, not just being compatible or coexisting, but kind of changing the definition of those neighborhoods. A big one is correcting the errors of past redevelopments. It's not just an attraction, it's an integral part of the neighborhood. It changes the character of the neighborhood itself, much more so than a shopping mall or a hotel complex. When you talk about visiting Georgetown or living there or just discussing it as a political and cultural entity, the waterfront is part of that. Georgetown is not normally thought of as a place of need, but it did need that. When I first met Jack, he was screening his first film, The Profile of Arthur Cotton Moore, the designer and architect of the new Georgetown waterfront. And one of my favorite parts of the film, it comes out that what drove Moore through that process, or part of what was driving him, was he was still fried about how the Kennedy Center turned out. His concept for the Performing Arts Center was inspired and integrated with that segment of the waterfront, and the result turned out to be anything but. Once you're in the main hall of the building, you can't even see the river. You have to go out to the edge of the balcony to even get a view of it. Moore calls the design a Whitman sampler, much more in keeping with Solomon detached federal monument style than something befitting an urban waterfront. You can see there the Georgetown waterfront, and that's the Watergate in the background. So it not just with Georgetown, but also gives it a nice line from Foggy Bottom as well. Multiple directions of integrating older neighborhoods. And now, if you've been to the Kennedy Center, there's a new annex, which includes a new footbridge that goes down to the water's edge. That's not the kind of real integration Moore would have liked, but it is a connection, and it's a bit of a correction. And it's a circling back, and I think that's a sign of how the river is moving back in towards that central place in the city's identity. It's almost like, well, how could we not? So the next logical step was to look at the wharf. The wharf really took those holistic successes of Georgetown and supercharged them. The green infrastructure, there's underground parking, green roofs, rain gardens, floating wetlands, over-the-top stormwater management, including on-site treatment of stormwater and recycling it through the building's cooling systems. It extends the neighborhood all the way to the water's edge and beyond and from all directions. If you live in the neighborhood, you don't have to go all the way to Haynes Point to get a breath of fresh air. Not anymore. And every mode of transportation goes there. That's something it also has over Georgetown. It's more walkable, it's more bikeable. I could talk all day about it, but the fact is there's already a lot of people doing that. The wharf doesn't need us to tell its story. And there's a bigger story that should come to the front. From Georgetown, through the core of the city, the monuments, West Potomac Park, East Potomac Park, Southwest, and around Buzzard Point, all the way up to the Navy Yard, the days of humanity being boxed out of DC's waterfronts and the river itself have come to an end. Now, what form would that transformational redevelopment take as you push up past the Navy Yard to the city's wild waterfront, the midsection of the Anacostia River? What's next in making those waterfronts more of a place for people? Now, east of the river and west of the river, always and forever have just one thing in common. It's the river. So what will it take? What might be in the works now to make living on the river as or more important than which side of the river you're on? That's the riddle that I wanted to pursue. And so to get started, I wanted to take this past season to get on the river, get to know some of the key sites, see what they had to tell me about where we're at now, document that all for you guys. So I'm going to get started a little bit outside that area at Diamond T Pier. That's it in the circle there. You see the Potomac here. There's a Washington Channel, the Anacostia there, and that little circle there. This is about 5 years old, I think, at least. You can see a lot of the new development hasn't happened yet. It's further down the river than the area I really want to focus on. The Buzzard Point to the west, Yards Park, and the Navy Yard to the east. In terms of redevelopment, this whole area is spoken for. Its direction is set. There's nothing transformational going on at the pier. I do love the footbridge to Yards Park. That takes a page from the Navy Yard. Wherever the government or municipal or industrial uses keep you away from the water's edge, go around them. Make a public space just over the water. That's potentially instructive for the future. But plenty here is new. This tiny little space offers an interesting nexus of the west and the east, you might say. On the west end of the block, the Martin is going up. Ultra-modern apartments with river views, sure to provide an inviting habitat for some of the city's newest residents. Just tucked onto the east side of the pier, and this is directly across the street from Nationals Park, is a little restored wetland called Turtle Beach, which is providing an inviting habitat for some of the area's oldest residents. There's one right there. And interestingly, the construction of these two habitats seem to take about the same amount of time. There's another satellite shot from a number of years ago. You'll see on the left, they're doing the ground prep there for Diamond T Park, where there's rain gardens going in there in a building complex. The salt line is there now. And speaking of ground prep, over there, just on the other side of the pier, you can see where they're just starting to put in, clearing out the invasive plants and putting in the first marsh grasses and native wetland plants. Here's what Turtle Beach looks like today. It's really filling in nicely. Now, the pier is right near the junction of the Anacostia and Potomac. It's one of the widest and deepest parts of the river. So it also sees the gamut of recreational boating. There's a sailing school right at the pier. There's a couple of marinas nearby, along with the ubiquitous rowers and paddlers. So there's plenty to do and see as you make your way to that part of the water's edge, and plenty of things to do once you get there. And it's very cool, but these aren't new reasons to come here. The boating set has had a hold on that stretch of the river, and rightfully so, for a long time. Things are a little different in the river's midsection. What brings people to the water's edge up there? Now, this trash-gobbling skimmer boat that happened by while I was at the pier was something of an omen. And my next stop, Anacostia Park, offered something of an answer. So yeah, I signed up for the pre-Earth Day trash cleanup at Anacostia Park. About 100 people showed up at this one site, and somewhere between 800 and 900, does that sound right, volunteers covered all the organized cleanup sites along the Anacostia. And this particular site was being prepped for the Anacostia River Festival. Now, the festival was delayed a week by weather, but even so, the turnout was underwhelming. In fact, it's a pretty safe bet that more people turned out the week before to pick up trash than turned out for this festival. So here's a look at the bike parade coming up and give you some idea what I'm talking about. So, it starts to feel like if someone's on their way down to the Anacostia, numerically the odds are that they're either throwing trash in or picking it up. It's kind of a sad thing on one hand how the trash operation is so big relative to everything else in this part of the river. It's good that people are working on this, and the people who do it are they're going to find other reasons to come down and spend time on the river. It's not transformational, but it's transformative. It changes the person who experiences it, and then that person can go out and change the world. Now, I don't think you can spend a morning or a day engaged in this and not have it affect your attitudes about things like plastic bottles. And if you think about how much garbage we produce, you realize, each one of us, it doesn't take a whole lot of us really to make this mess. It just takes a few, really. So I wanted to follow up on the challenges of trash and stormwater and stream erosion, and I was able to find all three in Watts Branch. That's it in the middle of the screen. There's the northern tip of Kingman Island there, and that's where Watts Branch kind of empties out into the Anacostia, crawls around the Parkside neighborhood over there to the right. It's the Anacostia's largest tributary and major source of untreated stormwater and garbage. Here's some actual video of where it empties into the Anacostia just south of Kenilworth Park. I'm going to show you about 4 minutes of footage in 3 parts. There's a trek through the stream itself from Marvin Gaye Park to Kenilworth Park, where it opens to the river. Then you will see some of the real-time effects of a strong storm. And you'll see what I saw the morning after the storm when I went back down there. It's not a film expert, but there is kind of a movie within a movie here about the fate of a certain piece of sports equipment. it gets less engineered and more eroded and stagnant as you go down towards the river. How full it was compared to before. Now that contraption you see at the end, a lot of you are probably familiar with it, is called a bend-along trash trap. These things are obviously helpful. All that trash won't end up in the main rivers or eventually the ocean. I was curious as to how the traps are emptied. So I went up here, this is the Nash Run, a smaller stream that runs almost parallel to Watts Branch, just a few blocks away. And to see how this is done, and you can see it's nothing like I imagined. Volunteers actually jump in there, collect and sort and bag the garbage by hand, all by type. You see they're doing foam containers and aluminum cans there, and analyzing the debris samples to look for other contaminants. There's a guy, with the netting, he's sifting through the slime to figure out what's garbage and what isn't. And, analyze what's getting into the river. I mean, good times, right? Now, there's a lot more to Watts Branch and Nash Run than just garbage and storm drains and slime that's relevant to this riddle. Now, I want to talk about stream restoration just a little bit. This is before and after shots of Nash Run. It does do a lot to revive the waters, managing their energy and flow, shoring up the banks, and ideally clearing the weeds and making room for native plants. This directly benefits the river and water quality. It helps control sediment. It's not going to spawn a rafting industry. No one's setting up sidewalk cafes next to this or planning mixed-use development projects. But there's no doubt that they make these neighborhoods better places too, turning a muddy morass into a living body of water running through the neighborhood. It's something I need to explore, just keep following that water up, talk to more people in the neighborhood about kind of what they want from this, what it means to them. And these are also the neighborhoods where green infrastructure can play the biggest role. But the fact of the matter is, after a month that was all about garbage, I was definitely ready for something different. This is Kingman Island.
Do you draw the line between you and I? All that's broken on the riverside. Is it a natural state, how it's supposed to be? I think there's something that we just don't see. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. It's not a new thing, it's been centuries. Old habits die hard, I think we'll all agree. It's now or never, you know, it's not too late. Change starts with us, it starts today. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. Rivers for us, by us, hope springs eternally. All connected, from the shore to the sea. I can't wait for the future that will be. We'll be swimming and splashing, what a sight to see. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers come eventually. Clean rivers, it's not a dream. Clean rivers start with you and me.
So there's a lot to talk about with Kingman Island. I'm going to focus on the wetlands restoration. The island was created over about a 30-year period from the dredging of the river. Basically, half of the remaining tidal wetlands at the beginning of the 20th century were uprooted and then dumped on the other half. And now this Google Maps image is a few years old in the winter at low tide, so that's kind of lucky. So you can clearly see they cleared out a lot of the invasives from the basin there. The patterns and the outlines of the wetlands being replanted with marsh grasses, wild rice, other native vegetation. So this is not a question of, oh, let's protect what's left and leave it alone. There was nothing left. Benign neglect is not going to get it done with restoring the wetlands. So it was much more like a construction project. People have been doing this seed by seed, shoot by shoot for about 20 years now. And here's the same area today and in season. And some other plantings that are really starting to take hold and self-propagate around the island. Now, some of this work is done by DC public school kids, and I think it's 8th graders. Now, if you go to the extremes of the symbolism there, they're helping to undo the ecological damage that was wrought in the course of the exploitation of, in some cases, their own ancestors. They're learning. I think every kid nowadays wants some outlet, some concrete thing they can say they did to sort of turn things around. Kingman is best known as the home of the city's annual Bluegrass Festival, which draws up to about 10,000 people. But truth be told, as it stands today, the islands themselves once the crowds leave and the food tents and the vendors and everything's cleared out of there, they're not very accommodating. The footpaths that are there, they're coated with crushed glass. It's part of the island's legacy as a landfill. The hiking trails are not very well maintained and kind of disappear on you. There's some footage of me trying to find a river view from the island and just getting horribly lost and going around in circles. And partly for that reason, these river, even lake views are very hard to come by, except in a few spots, like the southern tip of Heritage Island, a little sister island. Although, depending on what time of day it is, you're apt to be, knee-deep in water, checking out the river views there. Right now, I'm part of a team of pre-certified watershed stewards. We're starting one project to address this little shortcoming by creating a new little waterfront picnic area on the island. Here's some footage from our sort of unofficial groundbreaking ceremony. The current development plan for the island is a joint effort by the DC government and a nonprofit called Living Classrooms. It's pretty straightforward. They want outdoor classrooms, an educational center here. These are the RFK parking lots. This plan has been updated. The fields development has been put in there. Elevated walking paths around the outskirts of the islands, out over the marshes, a little bit like what you see at the aquatic gardens, I imagine. And upgraded mobility, accessibility features. So between the wetlands restoration, the educational resources on the island that are flourishing, and the forthcoming amenities provided by people like me, is this a transformational redevelopment? I would say no, not yet at least. It's river positive. It makes that area a place for people. It definitely addresses some of our past collective mistakes in redevelopment in terms of the dredging that created the island in the first place, sort of coming full circle there. But it's not really part of a neighborhood or a natural extension, and its uses are going to be too limited. Not transformational, but they are transformative, and I think that's a shortcut to where we're trying to go. That means they cause changes in the people that experience them. Whether it's building and maintaining part of a living ecosystem, becoming educated about the context of that work, doing it alongside your friends, neighbors, classmates, etc. It might not change your neighborhood or change the world, but it's going to change you, and then you're going to go out and do those things. You take it from there. Now you see how this perspective gets more and more granular, compared to where we started, but it doesn't have to stay that way. And I think there's a lot of civic pride in the city. That's a very powerful force in terms of knowing that the right things are being done and helping to make sure that it stays that way. And that's the aim. Thank you.